He already had power, wealth, but most important, he had an excellent brain, a clear head, and honor. Joseph stared into the darkness. Where were they? 6 men of the highest order were coming to hear him announce that their plan had succeeded. The highest order. Joseph had always thought the formal title of their society sounded so lofty as to be ordained by God. But now all members simply called it the Order. Yes, 6 members of the Order were coming to hear not only that they now had the Kaiser's gold, but that they also possessed Marie's key and her book of secrets. Yes, they'd won. They would deal the Kaiser a death blow, and they would raise a toast to Marie, magnificent Marie, architect of a weapon so powerful the one who owned it would rule the world. But there wasn't to be wild triumph, because the scores of gold bars worth millions of Deutschemarks, the Kaiser's private treasury, the book, and the key were lost to both Germany and England, in waters so deep he couldn't imagine the U-boat ever being found. In England's hands, having the gold would cripple the Kaiser's war, but having Marie's horrifying weapon would deal a death blow. Now no one would have either the gold or the weapon, ever. Still, he wondered if someone in the distant future would find the U-boat and the Kaiser's gold and Marie's key. Would they marvel at the lunacy of men long dead, marvel at their greed, their eagerness to crush one another, their butchering of the innocent? Would they look at Marie's weapon and be unable to fathom how any man, any country, could sanction its use? Joseph pulled the thin curtain back from the window and stared out into full darkness. There was no moon, and the few stars shimmered off the ground fog covering the field beyond the cottage. The men would leave their cars hidden and come into the cottage one by one. The Order was always careful, rabidly so in wartime. Soon now. Joseph looked over at the trundle bed in the corner, at his son, Leo, exhausted from his ordeal, still in shock. At last, he was sleeping soundly, legs pulled up against his chest, one thin arm dangling over the edge of the cot, the small white hand open. Joseph felt such fear, such love, that for a moment he couldn't breathe. If his son had died, it would have been his fault. But he was alive. He'd survived the hellish trip from Berlin to Scotland, the spectre of death constantly riding on his small shoulders. Joseph prayed Leo had understood all he'd told him on their trip from Scotland to William Pearce's cottage, understood that what his father and the other men had tried to do had been for him, for all the children of this useless, bloody war. Every time he'd said Ansonia's name, he'd tasted his own tears. And when he was through talking, the tears shiny on his cheeks, Leo had slipped his small hand into his father's and whispered, "Before we left her, Mama told me you were a hero. Now I understand why. What will happen now, Papa?" Joseph was humbled. He had no answer. He looked out the window again. He saw a shadow running across the field, and another. Wraiths in the night, the darkness bleeding around them. They would stagger their arrivals, each coming from a different direction, a few minutes between them. 6 men, dressed in black, weapons at their sides. 3 carried Webley .455 marks, standard issue, and 2 had Mauser C96s tucked in their holsters. They were prepared for anything, even though they should be safe enough here in a small cottage deep in the Cotswolds, expecting to hear news of their triumph. The first man stopped, whistled loudly through his teeth in a poor imitation of a whippoorwill.